Hey guys, what's up? It's me, Thomas. Today we're back here with Game Theory. Been a while. So, gonna start with this first one. Are the FNAF books actually canon? So, this is one I actually saw when I was on vacation, but finally have the time to check it out. So, here we go. We're about to see if those books are actually canon. As for my early guess, I think some are, some aren't. Like, again, this could be a whole, like, alternate universe deal, but, who knows. Like I said, I'm just throwing a guess out there, so we'll see. Will they all be true? None of them? Some of them? Let's find out. Be sure to like, subscribe for more. Hope you enjoy. Here we go.
What if the FNAF books were
Canon?
It's a question that's torn the fanbase apart for years, and now we've had an update to
Oh,
help
help
on
on
it
it too.
too. That
Right.
seems to be telling us the answer is yes. But what would that change? What theories would this ruin? And what does it mean we can expect from Secret of the Mimic this year? Today, we're going to find
that's
out.
coming out soon.
Hello, Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, the show that's always looking at FNAF from a new perspective. You may remember that last time I was getting a little frustrated with Scott and his lack of clarity in this franchise. It is fun to be able to solve these small loose threads, but we're still unable to use those to figure out the bigger mysteries. What's the deal with Gregory? What happened to Cassie? Are the books canon? Well, it appears Scott was listening, and now he's not messing around, because we just got ourselves a couple of new pieces of information to answer the biggest question in the franchise's recent history. Are the books canon? Recently, friend of the channel Dorco did a charity live stream, and as per usual, he got special access to some unreleased gameplay and teasers. One was a new version of 5 Laps at Freddy's, the weird spin-off kart racer thing, and while playing, the new billboard was discovered. It was advertising a company called Murray and their brand new robotic vacuum cleaner. In the story, The Mimic
Not me, I
Tales
swear.
from Peterplex,
I'm not the Murray.
character called Edwin Murray, who builds a robotic vacuum cleaner. He later goes on to be bought by Fazbear Entertainment and builds the Mimic, the big bad that we saw at the end of Ruin. We also got a very short teaser for a Help Wanted 2 update where we get to see the Mimic's costume model up close. But the important detail was actually in the very corner of the screen, a white tiger plushie with different colored eyes. In that same story, The Mimic, Edwin's son David has a white tiger plushie, and after he dies, the Mimic begins carrying it around. In later stories like Tiger Rock and Storyteller, the Mimic is heavily associated with a white tiger animatronic with 2 different colored eyes. A couple of days after all of this, the update came out, and it became even more clear that this was all to do with the Mimic. The tiger plushie was unlocked by using the code 1979, the date we found in the Secret of the Mimic trailer, and roughly around the time Edwin created the Mimic in the books. We get to see the toy factory that people reported the Secret of the Mimic demo from PAX West taking place in, and in the Mimic story, we learn that Edwin lived in a factory where he was making animatronics. As you might imagine, this set the fan base ablaze, because it seemed like the games were finally confirming the canonicity of the books. Before this, the strongest connection we had to the Tales books taking place in the game timeline was just the Mimic existing down in the FNAF 6 building in both the epilogues of Tales and the ending of Ruin. But now, with Edwin's company existing and a white tiger character who we've only ever seen in the books at this point, it feels like more than ever we are being shown that the games and the books may coexist in the same universe. But if that's the case, what does that change? We've been theorizing about this franchise for a long
Again, we started off, or at least if I remember correctly, the old theories, but didn't they say, like, the 2 were, like, a parallel universe at one point, and then they started coalescing? I don't know. I know there's, like, a FNAF multiverse. I mean, we do have the movie and the, Into the Ball Pit game, so could be. So, again, we're not too sure, because Dang FNAF does not give a straight answer. I mean, you know it's true. We can barely get a straight answer out of anybody in this franchise. Sheesh. It's always guess this, guess that. I mean, and also, wasn't Scott, like, anyway, let's just keep moving.
long time
What else
now,
you got?
and we've never really considered the books to be canon to the game timeline. So, if the books are now being shown as canon, I wondered what dominoes begin to fall. Which of those theories get debunked? What parts of the story would we have a new perspective on? And what could that mean for future releases? Better grab your Vanny masks once again, theorists, because we've got to take a look at FNAF in a whole new way and ask the question, what if the books were canon? Let's start with the series of books that are most tied to this modern era of FNAF. Tales from the Pizzaplex. In case you don't know, this is a series of 8 books, each containing 3 short stories and an epilogue, with all the epilogues combining into one continuous story across all 8 books. That gives us 25 full stories, all of which take place in a world where Freddy Fazbear's exists. Most commonly, it's some version of the Pizzaplex. You may have seen the term Tales games thrown around when talking about whether the books are canon to the games. Well, this is where that comes from. Tales games boils down to these 25 Tales stories being completely one-to-one canon to the games. Fortunately, you don't need to know all 25 stories inside and out in order to get to grips with how Tales would change the game. There are a few stories that make small changes, but mostly it's just to provide clarity on parts of the story we weren't sure about. Stories like Help Wanted, where we learn about Steve Snodgrass, a game developer who made the original 4 FNAF games for Fazbear Entertainment. Though we find out he's making them based purely on the rumors surrounding the business and his own memories. Plus, his mind is being affected by this little high-pitched noise, distorting the reality around him, and it's all coming from one little disc. If the books are canon, then this story would not only confirm the canon existence of sound illusion discs, everyone's favorite FNAF gadget, but it would also 100% confirm that canonically, the first 3 to 4 games are in-universe games. Now, we have known about this idea since the Help Wanted game.
Fazbear Entertainment hired the game developer. Those indie games were designed to conceal and make light of what happened. This isn't just an attempt to rebrand. It's an elaborate cover-up.
But what this changes is the reliability of those games for lore purposes. After the Help Wanted game, despite being told that these were in-universe games, it was unclear how one-to-one they were with reality. This story tells us that they were being made by someone who didn't know the true stories and whose mind was slowly being worn down. This allows for Scott and Steel Wool to retcon certain details from those games without them really being retcons. They're just something Steve made up. Obviously, if a modern entry confirms a detail from FNAF 1 to 4, then we can be sure it's likely true. And we actually get a good example of this. Dittophobia. This was the final story from Tales from the Pizzaplex, and it involves a character named Rory, living in a house that is described exactly like the FNAF 4 house. Rory believes he is a kid with a family, but as time goes on, it's revealed he's not a kid. He's grown up. The house is disgusting, and the entire place has been filled with a hallucinogenic gas coming from the underground bunker. Circus babies. We've wondered for a long time what was causing the nightmares in FNAF 4, whether it was sound illusion discs or just the overwhelming sense of fear and guilt. But if these books are canon, the answer becomes clear. The nightmares are real, but it's the hallucinogenic gas that truly brings them to life. So that's hallucinogenic gas, sound illusion discs, and don't forget we have VR and AR in this world. There are 3 reality-altering tools on the table for this franchise. Basically, we can't trust anything we see in the games anymore. Then there's the more modern stories like GGY. This one focuses on a kid named Greg that is hacking into the Pizzaplex animatronics, leaving high scores in all the arcade machines, and is getting rid of any counselors or anyone else that gets too close to the truth. With his arcade and hacking sign-offs being GGY, it's almost certain that his full name is Gregory, as in our Gregory from Security Breach, which also makes Gregory Patient 46, the mysterious child from the therapy CDs we collect during Security Breach that also has a habit of getting rid of therapists. The final point of clarity here is that Greg refers to himself as the wizard's favorite apprentice during the story, as well as using the handle Dr. Rabbit, which feels like a mighty big hint that Gregory is working for Glitchtrap, just like Vanessa. To be fair, we've actually been on board with this idea for a while, so it hasn't really changed any of our theories. But if the books are canon, it just solidifies it more as fact rather than theory. The only thing we have to wonder now is whether he's still under Glitchtrap's control. Help Wanted 2 and Security Breach seem to be telling us that Vanessa is now free of Glitchtrap, and in Ruin, they are implied to be working together to help Cassie. So is Gregory also free now, or is he just playing the long con? As I've said, those 3 stories don't really change much about the lore. They provide some
Also, back to the Gregory thing 1 sec. I mean, we could, based on, like, the second game, be like, okay, yeah, maybe he is still evil. Like, we're not too sure which of the canon ending, or at least the endings in, Security Breach is canon? I'm not sure. Did they ever establish which one was? It's been a while, so I don't remember. But if you guys can help with that, let me know. But, I think, like I said, it bases on the ending. Whether you go back to defeat, Afton down the basement, or get Fanny out of Vanessa. Could be either or, but anyway.
Clarity and add depth to certain lore aspects that were otherwise just dropped on us with no real explanation. But it doesn't really derail anything. However, that isn't the case for every story. And now we have to talk about the big three: the Mimic, the Storyteller, and the Epilogues. And if these stories are canon, it causes a drastic shift in how we look at this modern era of FNAF. A quick recap for those who don't know. These stories focus around the latest big bad of the series, the Mimic. It starts with Edwin Murray and his son, David. Edwin is a robotics genius whose company was bought by Fazbear Entertainment, and his job was to turn the original Freddy's costumes into animatronics. He ends up building the Mimic out of spare parts, and it's designed to mimic and play with his son. Sadly though, one day, his son runs out of the factory into the road and is hit by a car. But even after he dies, the Mimic continues mimicking David's behavior, causing Edwin to get angry and beat the Mimic to a metallic pulp. Edwin then disappears, leaving Fazbear to come and collect their property from Edwin's factory, where the Mimic begins violently murdering those who come to collect. They do eventually manage to contain the Mimic, as while they begin construction of the Pizzaplex on top of the FNAF 6 location, a version of the Mimic is dropped off alongside other animatronics that will make up the glam rock band. The Mimic is then programmed to help clear the endos that remain inside, ripping their arms and heads off. But it doesn't just stop at the endos. Construction workers begin being torn apart limb from limb, leading to the location being cemented over, trapping it inside the FNAF 6 location beneath the Pizzaplex. Many years later, once the Pizzaplex is up and running, the Mimic software is used to run something called the Storyteller, a baobab tree that connects the entire Pizzaplex, and it's designed to create new fun storylines for the characters to play out, except it ends up turning the animatronics into more childish and more dangerous versions of themselves. At this point, Edwin returns and tries to stop the Mimic, only to die in the process, with the Storyteller later being removed, but the Mimic program remains. There is a lot to unpack there, and a number of theories that go out the window if these books do end up being canon. The first and most obvious one, the origins of the Mimic. Up until this point, we've been theorizing that Edwin was meant to be a parallel for Henry. Both were involved in the early days of Fazbear. We even theorized that Henry had been bought out by Afton, much like Edwin was. Both made the earliest animatronics, and both had young children that died, and they took their agony out on their animatronic creations that were designed to mimic their now deceased child. That led to several theories about how Henry originally created the Mimic, and that it was originally made to be part of their traveling circus alongside Henry and William. But if the books are canon, that cannot be the case. It's very clearly Edwin that created the Mimic. Now, that's not to say the Mimic couldn't have been used as part of the circus. We see Jackie from Secret of the Mimic is very much circus themed, but it just wasn't the reason it was created. Instead, that would have just been a retroactive use for it. We also had a theory about how the Mimic had been locked underground for a very long time, at least since the 1980s. After Henry disappeared, Afton went to collect what belonged to Fazbear, including the Mimic, and then used it to help create the Funtime animatronics, only for it to all go wrong and for it to kill his daughter. He then locked the Mimic underground and created a Blue Bunny mixes to keep it locked away. Again, if the books are canon, this theory cannot be true, as the Mimic doesn't arrive at the Pizzaplex until construction on the Pizzaplex has already begun. There is still a chance that the Mimic was used by Afton to create the Funtimes, as they go to collect the Mimic just a few months after its creation sometime in the 70s, way before Afton's own spring locking. It just means that Elizabeth's death wasn't enough to make Afton go, maybe this isn't such a good idea, which I would say feels strange, but then again, again, this is the guy who tortured his own son with nightmare animatronics, so it sadly tracks.
True.
The books also reveal who is trying to revive Fazbear Entertainment. And turns out it's not an important or relevant character like Mrs. Afton, like we theorized about in our FNAF timeline.
Sorry, Miss Afton. Bye-bye.
Really do a new one of those. Let me know down in the comments if you'd like to see my updated version of this. Anyway, instead, it's a random businessman called Mr. Burrows, and it turns out the reason the Pizzaplex was built on top of FNAF 6 and the reason the Mimic was given access to the Pizzaplex systems wasn't for some big master plan with Afton's old computer chips and burnt corpse. It was just a dumb business move made by someone who knew nothing about anything in order to achieve the main goal that you might expect from a modern CEO: profits. And because Mr. Burrow dies alongside Edwin after installing the storyteller, which has clearly been removed by the time of security breach, that would imply that the messages we saw about Vanessa's hiring, despite her lack of qualifications, were almost certainly the Mimic's doing. Vanessa was possessed by the Mimic, aka Glitchtrap, and with Mr. Burrows dead, the Mimic had full control of Fazbear's systems, including emails. So when it says that her recommendation came from the top, it was likely the Mimic using Mr. Burrows' email to put its plan into motion. But what is
that's a definite whoops.
Well, at this point, it's just software. If it truly wants to continue Afton's legacy, it's going to need a body, and it has one just beneath the Pizzaplex. But this is where one of the big criticisms of the books being canon comes from. While there is clearly a Mimic under the Pizzaplex in the games, it doesn't appear to be the Mimic 2 that we read about in the epilogues. In the epilogues, it's a black, almost gooey spider-like thing, transforming into whatever shape it needs. But then in Ruin, we got this thing, an endo made up of the most random assortment of parts that walks with a limp. These two things don't feel like they're the same threatening creature, but if we think about it and we do consider the books to be canon, I think I might have an answer for this. By the end of the epilogues, the Mimic is destroyed, spring-locked by a jester costume. If the Mimic program wants to use this body, it would need to be repaired. Enter Vanessa, and thanks to GGY, likely Gregory, who can then use Glamrock Freddy to clear the path down into the depths, into the FNAF 6 building, and to where the Mimic's destroyed body lies dormant. From here, they would do what we initially suspected Vanessa was doing with Burntrap. They would repair him using a mix-mash of endoskeleton parts, anything they could find, in order to put it back together. That could be why we see it limping before the chase scene. It's either still partially damaged, or it's just because the parts aren't its own, but a random assortment that's not fully balanced or calibrated. That would then tie into the ending we got from the new Help Wanted 2 update. We see Mixes driven away in a van that looks suspiciously like the one Gregory drove in one of the security breach endings. Mixes wasn't always underneath FNAF 6. After the event of security breach, it seems like both Gregory and Vanessa have been freed from the Mimic's control, but they know what's down there. They put it back together, and because of that, they know how to stop it. What we're seeing in this ending could be Gregory and Vanessa driving Mixes to the Pizzaplex, collecting it from the same place the Mimic came from, the MCM toy store and factory, Edwin's. That's why Gregory's backpack and walkie-talkie end up down with the Mimic, because they were installing Mixes to keep it locked away, only for the Mimic to learn Gregory's voice and trick Cassie into freeing it. What all of this amounts to is actually something we theorized a very long time ago about the future of this franchise, one that we've actually been quite disappointed hadn't seemed to have come to fruition since then: the soft reboot of the franchise. By making Edwin canon to the games, and with the Mimic being the true identity behind Glitchtrap, it removes the parts both Afton and Henry played in our theories. We've finally moved on from the original characters and story of Henry versus Afton, and into a new era of new characters like Vanessa, Gregory, Cassie, and the Mimic. The Steel Wool era of games still uses the same rules and world as before, but it's more about the knock-on effects of those old characters' actions, rather than their direct input. And that's great. Ultimate Custom Night felt like a great ending to the story. Now, in retrospect, if the books are canon, we can truly split the series up and treat this as a new era,
from the Afton timeline to the Mimic stories.
However, if Tales is canon, this isn't the only thing that changes. There's one more story, one more domino that has to fall, and the story story is called Frailty. Here we meet a girl called Jessica, who has a special metallic necklace that when she scrapes off shavings and puts them on dying patients at a hospital, they get better. At the end of the story, she uses the last of this necklace and becomes a pile of scrap metal. The powers of this necklace are nearly identical to the power we saw from the necklace given to Sarah by Eleanor in the story To Be Beautiful. Sarah was eventually turned into a pile of scrap metal, but while she wore the necklace, she appeared completely human. The reason that this is such a big deal is that To Be Beautiful isn't from Tales from the Pizzaplex. It's from Fazbear Frights, the previous collection of short stories. And if Eleanor becomes canonical, then at the very least, every story connected to her also becomes canonical. Agony would become canon. Time-traveling ball pits would be canon. And the Afton amalgamation, or the Agony, the thing everyone said Matt was insane for even suggesting to be part of the game's timeline, would indeed be canon. This idea, the fanbase has dubbed Stitchline games because they all tie into the epilogues from those books surrounding a mysterious character called the Stitch Wraith. The Stitch Wraith is an endoskeleton that contains the souls of two children, Jake and Andrew. And Andrew is the more interesting one in terms of canonicity. Andrew was killed by William as one of the 6 missing kids that were killed in 1985. Because of this, Andrew is angry, vengeful, even, to the point where in The Man in Room 1280, he keeps a burnt and dying Afton alive in a hospital just to torture him inside his mind. That sounds familiar, almost as if it's exactly what happens in Ultimate Custom Night. A vengeful spirit torturing Afton for all eternity. For the longest time, we've attributed this role to Cassidy, the 5th missing kid, and a spirit possessing Golden Freddy. But if the Tales books are canon, which means that at least the Stitch Wraith stories are canon, that would mean that Andrew's spirit is more likely the one torturing Afton. The Man in Room 1280 and Ultimate Custom Night are happening at the same time. Andrew is the vengeful spirit. I suppose that would explain why the one you should not have killed is referred to using male pronouns.
Here and always watching. The one you shouldn't have killed.
The only confusing part is why show us Golden Freddy for beating the hardest difficulty? In the story The New Kid, they do find a kid with black curly hair inside the Golden Freddy suit, which matches the description of Andrew's hair. But then he's not shown to possess Golden Freddy in any of the Stitch Wraith stories. And in the Into the Pit game, we have a minigame that shows us an Andrew-possessed fetch, while Golden Freddy sits there with its eyes lit up, implying that Golden Freddy is already possessed and that it and Andrew are separate. Plus, what's with Andrew not getting a gravestone? The 6 graves we have are Gabriel, Fritz, Susie, Jeremy, Cassidy, and Charlie. Did Andrew's parents just not love him enough to get him one? It does feel odd that this clearly very important character doesn't really appear and has largely been forgotten in all the clues given to us inside the games themselves. But then, I guess this is where the new games can come in. If Stitchline is canon, that would make the Into the Pit game canon. And Megacat has already teased us with a Fetch sequel coming at some point. So details like this could be more thoroughly explored in those future titles. And actually there's something quite satisfying about that. What that would essentially leave us with are 2 sets of games running side by side, the Megacat series and the Steel Wool series. One aimed at clarifying Andrew's story within the older games, and one aimed at exploring the future of the franchise's story. It all sounds so idyllic, doesn't it? It feels like a number of holes in the story do get filled in if the books are in fact canon. The question is, do I really think they are? Now, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the other side of this canon coin just a little bit. While the appearance of a Tiger Rock plushie and Edwin's name on the sign do seem like compelling pieces of evidence towards the books being canon, there is a chance this is another Silver Eyes situation. In those books, we have William and Henry, but while they share a name with their in-game counterparts, they are decidedly different characters. In the games, Afton gets spring-locked and locked away in a back room, only being found 30 years later in FNAF 3. While in the books, Afton survives his spring locking, isn't locked away, and goes on to pursue immortality. In the books, Henry unalives himself in 1985 when he can't take the grief of his daughter's death, while in the games, he sacrifices himself when burning down the FNAF 6 pizzeria, which is at least 30 years after the closure of Freddy's. Same characters, different stories. And so, there is a chance we're seeing the same thing happen here. Edwin definitely seems to exist in the main canon, but it may not be one-to-one with his book. book counterparts. Tiger Rock also seems to exist in the games and the books, but the story surrounding him and the Mimic might be slightly different. It's also worth noting that we were introduced to William Afton's name and Henry as a full character in the books first, and then later they showed up in the games, which is exactly what we've seen with the Mimic, a character that was introduced in the books first, then showed up in Ruin later. It's following a similar pattern. The truth is, either of these options is entirely possible. Right now, we just don't have enough evidence to say one way or the other with complete certainty. We're just gonna have to wait for Secret of the Mimic to hopefully learn more and get the answer. However, despite the existence of these items not confirming the book's canonicity 100%, I will say that the more I worked on this episode, the more open I became to this possibility. Like I said at the start of this episode, last time I asked Scott for clarity, and it feels like that's what we're getting. So I'd be silly not to take it seriously. Plus, if the books weren't meant to be canon, then including a Tiger Rock plushie and Edwin's name is just sowing discord for the sake of it, rather than actually trying to help clarify things. And I know Scott is known for being a bit of a troll, but that feels extreme even for him. By including them while not completely confirming anything, it does feel like we're being pointed in that direction.
Let's just see where it goes.
As we've talked about today, that
we still
could
gotta check out
be
Secret
really
of the Mimic
helpful for explaining the mess that was Security Breach, Vanessa's original plan, who is running the Pizzaplex, and why the Mimic is different now than in the books. But I guess we're just going to have to wait and see when Secret of the Mimic comes out this year to know for sure. Maybe on April 6th, 2025, if the 4625 code from the New Help Wanted ending is anything to go by. But in the meantime, remember, that's just a theory. A game theory! Thanks for watching. World premiere on Game Theory. I have found...
Okay, we already seen that one, but you get the idea. So, honestly, I don't know if this is gonna be a thing, but, who knows. Let me know what you guys think of the theory. You agree? You disagree? Let me know. Till next time, adios.